Good morning, everybody. It's always slightly daunting to be the first person up here, and even more so when the expectation is that somehow I'm going to explain cloud computing in the next half hour. Let me get a disclaimer in straight away and say I'm not. There's absolutely no way that we could cover cloud computing, indeed in the whole of today, never mind in the next half hour. But I think to pick up on the point that Richard made, one of the big problems that we all have with cloud computing, myself included, is that it is one of those incredibly endearingly flexible terms that so many of the IT vendors have jumped on. There are companies out there that once upon a time you thought of as a database company, and now apparently are a cloud computing company and always have been a cloud computing company. There are large enterprise software companies that have no visible means of cloud computing that I can see, who suddenly proclaim themselves to be floating in the cloud with the best of them. And then there are companies like Salesforce.com and some of the cloud computing startups that we'll come on to, who genuinely can claim to be cloud computing companies. But the interesting thing throughout the whole of the cloud computing debate is that it is a bandwagon that is rolling and rolling and rolling and isn't going to stop anytime soon. So it's very encouraging to see that the debate is now moving into the area of recruitment and in employment and what happens to the IT professional in all of this, because I think that's perhaps an area that's been neglected to date. I want to start off by attempting to have a look at defining the cloud. I say attempting because, as I said earlier, I don't think there's any chance whatsoever of us actually pinning it down to an absolute definition. It is the latest next best thing since the last next best thing. If you go to certain large software companies that spent 15 years selling us client-server computing, they'll now tell us that the next best thing is cloud computing. It is indeed the subject that all IT companies, all IT vendors need to be focusing on, need to have a cloud pitch at the moment. Is it more of the same? Potentially yes, potentially no. We have been here before. It used to be called application service provision. Perhaps it was called hosting. Perhaps it was called internet computing. It's now called cloud computing. There is a reason why it's going to work this time where it didn't work before, but we'll come on to that in a second. Is it a service? Is it an application? Is it a platform? Can you go down and buy £0.5 cloud down at PC World? Well, the answer is yes to all of those and no to all of those. Cloud in action. We all interface with cloud computing at a consumer level. We've all got Facebook accounts, we've all got Twitter accounts, most people will have a Hotmail account or a Gmail account. We use Flickr to post our photographs up online. That's all cloud computing. It's an internet-based service. You post stuff up onto the web, someone else runs it for you, someone else hosts it for you. That's the fundamental essence of what cloud computing is going to be about. Now, beyond that, we'll get into all sorts of arguments about multi-tenancy, single tenancy, and I think Martin's probably going to touch on some of those in his presentation, so I don't propose to go down there. There are different technical definitions that vendors will apply to cloud computing. It is very much a case of horses for courses. You pay your money, you take your choice. What version of cloud computing suits you is probably the definition of cloud computing. I think the essential part of cloud computing, which is the bit that appeals to so many people, is this as a service concept. There are some very dubious claims out there. There are some very dubious claims from a lot of vendors who, as I say, previously were known for something else. They were a data center company, they were a networking company, they were a telco, they were a database company, they were an ERP company. Suddenly they're all a cloud company, or they all have a cloud message of some kind. A lot of those messages, when you look at them closely, actually relate to it's essentially third-party hosting. So, for example, until very recently, if you went to Microsoft, they would point you in the direction of one of their partners who would offer you a cloud service. But actually that cloud service was simply that they would run their application in a data center for you and you'd tap into it. Now, you could argue that that's cloud computing. If you were to go to Salesforce.com or SuccessFactors or NetSuite or one of the cloud computing purists, they would argue that it's not. There's at least one large vendor that has a cloud computing offering which, when you look at it, is no different to basic outsourcing. It's just, you give us your application, we run it for you. We had the application service provider model back in the 1990s, and that didn't work. Now, it does work this time around. The reason it works this time around is because of the internet. One of the things that you never ever say to any journalist, any high-tech journalist, it's a little tip for marketing people in the room, is that the internet changes everything. But actually, the problem with that statement is the internet does change everything, and it changed the ASP model. When the ASP model was first proposed back in the mid-1990s, the internet wasn't the ubiquitous business platform that it is today. It now it's part of our lives, it's part of our everyday lives. There is no single company and organisation throughout the world really that could survive without the internet. That's why we now can make the ASP model work. Also, the ASP model was pitched at the small and medium enterprise market, and that's certainly where companies like Salesforce.com started, but as we'll come on to see in a second or two, we have long since outstripped the SME barriers. Computing as a service is essentially what cloud computing is, but it comes in a number of forms. These are the three perhaps most common forms at the moment. There's the essential software as a service, so that's your Salesforce.com, your NetSuite, your SuccessFactors, your basic HR application, CRM application, ERP application, that you come into your office, you switch on your computer or you switch on your iPad or you switch on your iPhone and you tap into an application which is hosted in someone else's data center. You download as much or as little as you need to do of the functionality, you pay for it on a pay-as-you-go model, and you rent the software. Then there's the platform as a service. Platform as a service is stuff like Force.com from Salesforce.com, which is effectively an attempt to do Windows in the cloud, as it were. Microsoft now has Azure. This is when you have a development platform upon which you will build other applications. So Salesforce.com partners build on top of Force.com. They build their own third-party applications, which are then hosted in the Salesforce.com App Exchange. I'm sure Martin will be going to talk a bit about that in his presentation. And finally, we have the infrastructure as a service component. And infrastructure as a service is really the really interesting part of the market at the moment. The software as a service part is fairly well established now. Platform as a service is a fairly straightforward concept. Infrastructure as a service is a far wider field. It encompasses all those companies that used to be big data center providers, so the EMCs, the IBMs, the Fujitsus. It's about setting up huge hosting environments. It's about networking. It's about the tin. It's about the hardware. You know, when we talk to the software as a service companies, they all say we are, well, to steal from Salesforce.com, we are the software company that wants to kill off software. Well, yes, it's a nice marketing phrase, but actually there's a really great big Oracle database running the whole thing in a great big data center somewhere, and when that doesn't work, nothing else works. So the infrastructure as a service providers are the essential backbone that make the cloud computing revolution work. It's the bit you'll never see. So this perhaps is the old world of software. The Siebels, the Oracles, the SAPs, the large enterprise software providers who had this unholy alliance with the large systems integrators, the Accentures, the EDSs, the IBM Global Services. And you have the stories about the large end-user organisation that's embarked on a huge SAP R3 implementation. On day one, a coach turns up in the car park with 60 Accenture consultants in it. And 2 months later, 2 coaches turn up in the car park with 120 Accenture consultants. And 3 months later, 4 coaches turn up with 500 Accenture consultants. And somehow they're never, ever going to go away. And somehow that SAP on-premise implementation never quite reaches its end. Now, for SAP, you can substitute Oracle or Siebel or any of the large traditional ERP, large CRM, large enterprise applications vendors. But it's a model that we can't afford anymore. It's a model that end-user organisations simply cannot afford. It's expensive, it's costly, you pay for too many licenses that you don't need, you have shelves and shelves and shelves of applications, of licenses that just don't get touched. I think Gartner once did a study which estimated that something like 52% of all Siebel licenses were used, which meant that 48% weren't and just sat on a shelf somewhere in an IT department. We now have the new world, the business cloud. These are some of the pure play cloud computing companies, the companies that are the startups, as it were, although it's really rather silly to refer to them as startups any longer. NetSuite and Salesforce.com are both 10 years old. Salesforce.com is a $1 billion a year run rate company. These are serious software companies now. There are still new ones coming along. Workday is quite an interesting company. It's basically PeopleSoft in the cloud, quite literally. Dave Duffield, who was the founder of PeopleSoft, basically founded Workday. He still has an active role in it. Their principal sales and marketing model, for at least for the first couple of years of their existence, was Dave phoning up all the people he used to sell PeopleSoft to and saying, chuck it out and replace it with Workday. Zuora is a particularly interesting company because it's almost a third generation cloud company. Salesforce.com was at least partially backed by Larry Ellison of Oracle when it first started. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce.com, used to work at Oracle. Mark left, set up Salesforce.com. Salesforce.com became incredibly successful. Mark has since taken a personal stake in setting up Zuora, which is an online billing and subscription company. It was set up primarily to address the business model of the cloud computing market. So anybody with a subscription billing system and recurring revenues business model would find it very difficult to send out billing and invoicing and subscriptions. Zuora is designed and set up to specifically tackle that kind of cloud computing based subscription model. So benefits of the cloud. Well, these are all the straightforward ones: quicker, cheaper, faster, scalable, more agile. You pay for what you pay per drink. You don't pay for licenses that you don't use. If you require 20 licenses this quarter, you pay for 20 licenses. If you need 40 next quarter, you pay for 40. If you only need 10, you pay for 10. Now, it's not that simple. Of course, it's not that simple. There are lots and lots of legal considerations to put into place. There are service level agreements that you need to address. There's all sorts of I's that need dotting and T's that need crossing. But the basic idea is you scale up, you scale down according to what you need, and you pay for what you use. The reason we've got the generator and the pylon here is that I think I've tried over the years to come up with a better definition of how this works, but unfortunately I have to keep going back to Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com's explanation. If Mark were here, I mean, I know Martin's here to channel and be Mark Benioff here on Earth today, but I'll borrow the role just for a second. If Mark were here, he would say that when they built this hotel and they decided they needed power, they didn't go out into the backyard, build their own generator, wire up the building and spend a fortune on running it. They phoned up the electricity company and they switched on the power and they paid for what they got. Yet, for whatever reason, organisations have spent years and years and years building their own generators in the form of data centres and running their own computing internally. For rent for sale, as I said earlier, one of the problems with the old kind of Siebel / Oracle / on-premise application model is that you bought your licenses in tranches. So you bought in 50 to 100 seats, or you bought 100 to 200, or 200 to 500. Now that's fine if you're kind of at the top end of that, but if you're buying 50 to 100 and you actually only need 60, then 40 are going to sit unused on your shelf. As I say, with cloud computing, if you need 60, you pay for 60, you rent it. Now, where we're not entirely proven on this one yet, because we haven't really been going for long enough with large enterprise implementations, is at what point does it become more sensible to buy than to rent? It's like moving to a new town. If you're going to be there for 6 months, you'd rent. You know, if you're still there 6 years later, you might consider actually buying a flat or buying a house. At some point, some of the analyst groups argue it becomes more cost effective to actually buy and own licenses than it is to actually continue to rent. But we haven't actually got to the stage with most large-scale enterprises and enterprise implementations where we can rigorously put that to the test. But we're not far off it now. So who's doing it? These are some of the just 4 examples of some very serious companies who are doing some very serious cloud computing work. This is a little strange symbol on the side is Japan Post, which I believe is still Salesforce.com's biggest global implementation. It's 45,000 users. It's based around creating an entire infrastructure, cloud-based infrastructure for all of the Japanese government's postal service. It's a huge countrywide implementation, and it's a very, very complicated rollout. When you talk to the CIO at Japan Post, the sheer complexity of trying to make it all work, rip out all the old systems, put in the new systems, this is a serious piece of IT work. Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's Register about a year ago signed up with NetSuite. They only just started talking about it now because it was such a sensitive thing for a company like Lloyd's Register to embark upon. I think when you get companies like Lloyd's Register that are dealing with the kind of incredibly sensitive information that a kind of organisation like that are dealing with and are confident to put it up into the cloud, it takes away a lot of the concerns about the security and about data protection and about information transfer, which a lot of people often cite as barriers to the adoption of cloud computing. Siemens. Siemens is really interesting. It's the Siemens is kind of a good example of what's going to happen inside a lot of organisations, but on a grand scale. Siemens was a very large SAP HR user. They kicked out SAP and replaced it with HR cloud applications from a company called SuccessFactors. It's the world's biggest cloud computing applications rollout. It's 420,000 users across 80 countries and 20 languages. Yeah, you don't get much more serious as an enterprise rollout than that. And also the fact that this little cloud computing company took the business away from SAP, who are the installed German IT provider, to Siemens is fairly significant. And again, when you talk to the CIO at Siemens, all the usual reasons are cited. It's cost, it's flexibility, it's being able to scale up, it's being able to upgrade your systems very, very quickly overnight. It's not getting bogged down in multi-year implementations. And the Daily Telegraph Media Group, probably the poster child in the UK for cloud computing. The former CIO there, Paul Cheeseborough, is a great cloud evangelist, great cloud advocate. They had very serious issues. They were very much a Microsoft shop, very Windows-based, large IT department very resistant to change. Paul came in and they had mandate from the Barclay brothers at the top of the company saying cut the IT costs, increase the flexibility. They brought in Salesforce.com to handle the subscriptions, newspaper subscriptions on the website. They've got SuccessFactors doing HR. They've replaced all the Microsoft email with Google Mail. They had Capgemini integrating it and pulling it all together. They've got Financial Force doing their accounting and finance software, and the rollout continues. Initially a lot of resistance from the IT department, but now the benefits have been realised and there's a great deal of acceptance for it. Paul Cheeseborough has now left there and has now moved to News International, so I think Salesforce and SuccessFactors, etc. will all be getting calls from News International anytime soon. And who's going to be doing it? The big growth area, I think, for cloud computing for the next 12 months is the public sector. In the US, Obama has a CIO called Vivek Kundra, the federal White House CIO. They're pursuing a very aggressive cloud computing agenda. They've got plans to take US data centers, government data centers down into single figures, massive data center consolidation exercise. They're replacing all the email systems, they're replacing all the procurement systems. The Department of Defense in the States has started using cloud computing. They use software from a company called Right Now, which is kind of very, very tightly security enabled and accredited. Now, we're not being quite as aggressive about it over here, but we're going to be. The Digital Britain report last year, under the former Labour government, included in its findings a recommendation that we embark upon something called the G Cloud. Now, this was rather buried away and got kind of ignored slightly under all the fuss about what was going to happen to the BBC and the so-called broadband tax. But the G Cloud is still a living, breathing project. There are expected to be some announcements on it anytime soon, but we're currently at this stage of scoping exactly what the G Cloud will be. And it's unlikely that it will be a G Cloud any longer. The G Cloud, I guess, was kind of the living embodiment of a new Labour IT project, in that it was big, it was expensive, it was huge in its scope, huge in its ambition, and very, very complicated. With a cap of £100 million on any single IT project now, it's not feasible to do a G Cloud, but it is feasible to do lots of G Clouds. So I think you'll see that happening at local government level. You'll see the NHS IT programme replaced by a cloud-based alternative. You'll start to see an awful lot more cloud stuff being rolled out, for all the reasons that the private sector has done it. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's quicker. The days of doing a multi-million pound, multi-billion pound 10-year IT programme are long since over in the private sector, and they're certainly long since over in the public sector. So, jobs. It's interesting in the States that the biggest opposition to Vivek Kundra and Obama's plans are actually the federal CIOs, who see their little empires disappearing. It's the same in the private sector. I think you have two types of CIO at the moment. You have those like Paul Cheeseborough at the Telegraph, who see the potential here, who embrace this, who run with it, who want to be at the forefront of it. And then you see those who are looking like rabbits in a headlight and going, oh my God, what's happening here? In some respects, what cloud computing does is call the CIO's bluff. Yeah, for years and years and years, I've been writing about IT for 20 years now, started at computing. I remember from those days onwards, the one common theme that IT people have always had when you talk to them is, if only we didn't have to do the plumbing, if only we didn't have to do all the storage upgrades, if only we didn't have to do the ERP upgrades, gosh, the contribution that we could make to the business. we'd be taking a serious business people, would be on the board, would be sitting there next to the CFO and the CMO and the CEO, and we'd be contributing to the revenue generating instead of IT being a cost. Well, cloud computing calls you bluff. Cloud computing says you don't have to do that. You don't have to do those ERP upgrades. You don't have to do all that kind of work, all that boring plumbing stuff anymore. Someone else will do it. Salesforce.com will do it, or SuccessFactors will do it, or NetSuite will do it, or RightNow will do it, or Amazon will do it. So someone else will do it. Yeah. So now you've got all that time that you wanted to show how much worth you have for the business, what you're going to do. And there's an awful lot of CIOs sitting there going, we didn't think we'd have to answer that question. If you look at somebody like Paul Cheeseborough at the Telegraph, what he's done is embraced it, run with it, and actually turned what was a cost centre into a revenue generator and a productivity enhancer. Once you get into the public sector unions are already upset enough about the cuts in the public sector. Once they start to realise that cloud computing, a G-Cloud rollout, means that we can get rid of an awful lot of data centres and an awful lot of in-house IT staff, then Unison and Unite and all the public sector unions are not going to be happy. So we'll run into the same problems over here as Vivek Kundra and Obama are running into in the States. So what are the skills needed in the cloud? Well, it's not as straightforward, I think, as being able to say I'm qualified in SAP R3 or I'm qualified in Oracle Financials. I think there's a whole pile of skills that you can transfer from that background into the cloud. There's also a whole pile of new requirements. It's not a case that the CIO will go away, but the CIO and the IT worker will change their roles. The CIO will in some respects become the Chief Innovation Officer. But the things that will be needed are things like integration skills. You're not going to chuck everything out. You know, if you're Siemens, you've still got a whole pile of SAP stuff in there while you're rolling out your SuccessFactors stuff, because you're not going to chuck it out overnight. And even when you do finish that, that's just the HR side of things. You've still got your ERP system, your CRM systems, or your back office systems that are running on SAP. And your cloud stuff has to integrate with that. There are very, very, very few greenfield sites out there, and there'll be very, very, very few pure cloud enterprises. At the Telegraph, there's still a whole pile of stuff that's run on-premise, in-house, and all the cloud stuff has to integrate into that. Integration skills are a very, very big part of the market now. The scoping consultancy, not the kind of 10 coachloads of Accenture consultants turning up in the car park anymore, but there's definitely a role for the consultancies out there. And in some respects, cloud computing offers companies like Accenture and IBM Global Services and Capgemini a chance to go back to their roots. Go back to being management consultants, go back to doing change management, going back to doing business process re-engineering, because that's what you need to do before you start rolling out a cloud computing implementation in anger. And then there's the development, there's the third-party developers. So there will be people who specialise in developing on Force.com, there will be people who are Azure developers. There's a role there still for the traditional developers. And the old skills won't die off, because you will still have to keep running those things. You have to keep running those old back-office SAP systems in the background, and we're not going to get rid of you straight away if that's where your skill base is. So here are some of the major cloud providers. Top right-hand side, my side, top left-hand side, your side, software is Salesforce.com, probably the poster child for cloud computing applications, say 10 years old, $1 billion run rate company, now specialising in CRM, Salesforce automation. They have the Force.com platform. They have a new thing called Chatter, which I suspect we may hear a little bit about in Martha's presentation. NetSuite. NetSuite is quite interesting. NetSuite is now pitching itself as Larry Ellison's other software company. NetSuite is kind of majority owned by Larry Ellison and his family. It's an ERP company rather than a CRM company. It's an end-to-end offering. It's kind of a cloud computing version of SAP for the SME market. Right Now Technologies. Right Now is an interesting company. They've got a very big presence in the contact center, call center market. They've got some very good companies, customers like British Airways. They've made an interesting transition because they used to sell both on-premise and on demand, so both on-premise and in the cloud. Now they sell purely in the cloud because nobody wants to buy on-premise stuff any longer in the markets in which they play. SuccessFactors. SuccessFactors is should be a better known company than it actually is. They've got some fantastic customers. They've got the world's biggest cloud applications rollout, as I said. They're founded by a chap called Lars Dalgaard, who's the the European face of cloud computing. He's a mad Danishman. He's about 6'6", swears a lot, and is extremely charismatic. And they do HR talent management applications in the cloud. Coda, this should really be Financial Force now, as they've rebranded slightly, but Coda provides you with the accounting financial software in the cloud. They set up a separate company, Financial Force, to differentiate themselves from the on-premise versions of their applications as Coda. Down here we've got Amazon and Google. Amazon is probably the best known of the public cloud providers. So if you have a private cloud, it's something that you would run yourself. So if you wanted a particularly high level of security, if you have very specific customization needs, if you have, for some reason, you needed to have your own private isolated cloud, then you would go to a private cloud provider. Alternatively, you can go to a public cloud provider like Amazon, where you will share the resources with 101 other people. Google, very interesting. Obviously, we all think of them as the search company. We increasingly think of them as the mobile phone company. What we don't yet think of them as is the business applications company. But I suspect we will at some point. Now, whether they move out of their office-based their office in the cloud type applications, which they already offer, into the kind of Salesforce.com, NetSuite type of environment, remains to be seen. Usually about once a quarter, some rogue journalist starts a rumour that Google's going to buy Salesforce.com, but it hasn't happened yet. It must be just about time for that to happen now. IBM, Capgemini, Accenture, big systems integrators, all now have their own cloud practices in some form or another. A lot of them tend to be very divided against themselves, though. At one of those companies, and I shan't say which one it is, there's an SAP practice, an Oracle practice, and a software as a service practice. And when you talk to the software as a service practice people, which is the smallest division, they all go, yeah, the cloud, we are the future, it's great, we're going to make so much money. And you talk to the Oracle people, and they kind of go, well, we kind of get it, but let's not talk about it now. And you talk to the SAP people, and they go, no, never going to happen, because we make too much money out of rolling out SAP applications in the traditional way. There's a lot of work to be done internally inside those companies to work out which model is going to prevail, and it will be the cloud one in the end. Down the bottom we have EMC. This slide's rather out of date because we have Sun down there, which should be Oracle now. Cisco, BT, so the big kind of infrastructure providers, so the people who provide the kit for data centers, the people who make the cloud run. Now, what about Oracle, Microsoft, and SAP? The three principal companies that IT people want skills in at the moment. Well, they each have a slightly different attitude. Microsoft has got cloud religion, and it's got it bad. It's got it really, really, really bad now. They really didn't like it. They really didn't want to know. It threatened everything that Microsoft stood for. But they've embraced it, almost to the point of smothering it. Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, can't step out on stage now without saying cloud, 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 cloud all the time. They are 101% committed to the cloud computing model. Now, inevitably with Microsoft, all roads lead back to a Microsoft product. Azure is the product to watch with Microsoft. They are now starting to release on-demand versions of their applications. So Microsoft Dynamics Live is their first cloud computing business application, which you can actually buy direct from Microsoft as opposed to having to go to a third party and getting it to host. Microsoft are going to be a serious power in the cloud computing industry. SAP are a bit confused. SAP, perhaps more than any other company, has most to lose from the cloud computing revolution, because if you don't do those big ticket 5-year, 10-year ERP rollouts any longer, that's this SAP business model. That's what it was. Yeah? So you have to find something new to do. They are taking it seriously now. They've taken a long time to get their heads around it. Leo Apotheker, who was the CEO who was ousted earlier this year, now admits that they took too long to get there. They've taken far too long to get there. They have two primary cloud computing pushes. One is at the very low end. One is at the Microsoft NetSuite end. And it's a product called Business by Design, which is now coming out on general release. It's a low-end ERP offering. It's for companies of 9, 10, up to 50 users. Completely different alien audience for the SAP audience. Then there's the secret work that's going on behind the scenes. They've got a guy called John Wookey who's doing a lot of, who is defected from Oracle and is doing a great deal of work behind the scenes to cloud enable an awful lot of other Microsoft products at the higher end, SAP products at the higher end Yeah, we still don't know exactly what he's up to and exactly what's in the labs, but there will be some big announcements from SAP towards the end of this year, start of next year. Oracle. Oracle's a funny lot. They get it, and they've been doing it for so long. They've been talking about internet-enabled computing, they've been talking about computing on the web, they've been doing cloud computing. Trouble is, Larry didn't come up with the name. Yeah? So as a result, Larry won't use the name. So as a result, until very recently, every time you talked about cloud to Larry or to any other senior Oracle exec, the result was spluttering, shouting, what is the cloud? The cloud is just water vapor. It's just effing water vapor. Well, yeah, okay. Get your head around it, Larry. You didn't invent the term this time around. You're going to have to go with it. It's interesting that they have now started doing seminars and roadshows that are now the Oracle Cloud Computing Roadshow. And Larry now grudgingly says, if I have to call it cloud, I'll call it cloud. They have a fantastic cloud offering. A lot of it's been bought in. Siebel CRM on Demand is their biggest cloud offering, and that was something which came from outside when they acquired Siebel. Oracle also has a number of offerings which are supposedly cloud computing, but which are actually hideously close to outsourcing and just to third-party hosting. There are at least 3, I think, products inside Oracle that are called something on demand, but when you look at them closely, all 3 of them are very different, and they're very different things. And that's Business Cloud 9. That's my kind of brief overview. If you want to find out more, please do come and visit our site, businesscloud9.com. It's free to air, no Modoc style paywalls, so just come along and sign up. You'll get all the cloud computing news that's fit to print and quite a bit that's not. I also encourage you to come to our conference in November the 30th, the Business Cloud Summit. Details are on the site as well. I believe CWJobs, one of the sponsors last year, and I hope we'll be there this year. And with that, I hope I've skimmed the surface of cloud computing. I don't claim whatsoever to have answered any of the questions, I suspect.
One of the things we talked about there, I mean, you said that the cloud has now evolved beyond the SME, but that was got to be one of the big drivers for it, really. I mean, is that one of the reasons why there's been a surge in? It's not surely not just the recession. Has it been the use of SME computing?
I think there's two answers to that. The SME community is the natural place for itself because you don't have an IT department and you don't have a CIO, and so therefore cloud computing enables you to have the kind of type of computing resource that you can do if you're an enterprise, but traditionally you couldn't do if you're an SME. In terms of the recession, absolutely. And Greg Gianforte, the CEO right now, is on record as kind of saying that the recession was a good thing for cloud computing. It was a bad thing in every other respect, but in terms of making cost the main focus, I mean that is still the principal driver that most people will look at cloud computing for.
I mean, cost is a major driver. Where's the decision coming from? Is this from the board and the FD rather than the CIO? I mean, we talked about a resistance from some and evangelism from others. I mean, it's a board level decision.
I think the whole role of the CIO in all this is really interesting. I mean, I say there are those who oppose and there are those who embrace. There's one of the Gartner analysts tells a story about a large organisation in the UK where the CIO reckoned they spent about 40% of their time running around the building, as he put it, driving out rogue Salesforce.com implementations. One of the ways that certainly initially the likes of Salesforce.com and NetSuite got into organisations was through the back door. It was you were the sales exec sitting there waiting for the IT department to give you that Siebel upgrade, and it was maybe scheduled for 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 12 months' time, far too late for your specific needs. So you got your credit card out and you downloaded Salesforce.com or you downloaded NetSuite, and that's all you need to do. So you basically disenfranchise, you disintermediate the IT department completely. Now, some organisations are quite happy to do this. Other organisations have 40 fits about it, and certainly there's a huge amount of control that needs to be imposed, and there has to be a very strict set of decisions taken as to whether that's a good thing for your organisation or not. In terms of CFOs, CEOs, they get the cost side of it. They get that argument. It's also very, very difficult to. Sometimes, if you do have that kind of rogue implementation stuff, if you do have that kind of, I'm just swiping my credit card and away you go, and then it goes through an expenses form and it turns up on the CFO's desk 3 or 4 weeks later, and he doesn't really notice it. So your IT costs can end up all over the shop if you're not very careful.
I mean, we talked about the public and the private cloud.
Yeah.
And I mean, is that one of the risks, Ed? I mean, people see people like the Googles, the Amazons of this world as the obvious public face of that. Is that something that's holding organisations back, though? The fact that it's going to be out there with, as you say, the 101 other users.
Yeah, I mean, the Google Amazon factor is kind of interesting. It's kind of like I've had a conversation several times with Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com, where there was a lot of talk about the Facebooking of CRM. That in order for enterprise systems to be used these days, with generation coming into work, that things had to look like Facebook or they have to look like Twitter, or no one's going to use them. Which is fine, but then you go to the CEO, or the CIO, or the CFO and say it's got to look like Facebook. And he says, no, that's what my daughter uses in her bedroom. It's not a serious enterprise business system. Amazon kind of has the same issue. Amazon's the book company. Yeah, we don't think of it as the infrastructure, cloud infrastructure company, cloud platform company, but it is. It's huge, and you know, it's every bit as capable an IT provider as a BT or an IBM or anybody else. But the perception of it still is that it's the book company. Should we be depending on the book company for our IT infrastructure? Google has an equally interesting one, because Google, you know, the company that lives by the motto of "Do no evil," yes. But gets itself into all sorts of these bizarre PR messes when the Daily Mail starts its fatwas on it for you know, scanning my house through with a camera and sticking it onto the internet type thing. Google also, there's just this strange perception about Google that's building up. It's kind of Google phobia that's growing, that needs to be kept in check. And I suspect, you know, Google could turn into the Microsoft of the cloud. You know, it used to be you bashed Microsoft in the client server area. You can maybe we'll get to a stage of bashing Google all the time in the cloud. When David Cameron, before the election, suggested that we could scrap the NHS IT programme, you know, 12.7 billion and counting, and replace it with some cloud-based alternatives from Microsoft or Google, all hell broke loose. And it wasn't about putting NHS records into the cloud, it was giving NHS records to Google. That was what seemed to upset people, which is completely irrational when you stop and think about it. But you know, that's going to be, I think, a big cultural barrier.
Gentlemen, I'm going to get a microphone to you. This gentleman here in the blue shirt. Now, it's going to be a little bit of pass the parcel, because we're not going to try and tread on everybody's laps. Do introduce yourself so we can all know who you are. And
hi there.
Hello there.
I'm Jamie and I'm from Ellen Webb. Well, the question is, we've spoke a lot about the clients and all the other companies that are going to be using cloud computing, but looking out for candidates and what their skills might be. What are some of the major skill sets, as in like virtualization skill sets?
So you're looking at the back end, the sort of traditional data center type skills, virtualization, server management, that kind of infrastructure, engine room type stuff. And then front end stuff, I suspect what you're looking for are people with social media skills. So if something like Chatter from Salesforce.com is going to take off in a big way, that's going to require people who've got a very good feel for social networking, collaborative technologies, collaboration technology skills. I think are a real sweet spot as we go forward, with whether it be in the Google world, the Salesforce world, the SuccessFactors world. All of those companies are building collaborative technology functionality into it. And so people who perhaps started off in Lotus Notes, think sort of next generation Lotus Notes type skills, I suspect.
Sunil Dougal, Just IT Recruitment. There's a couple of things really. One is that the sort of cost model seems quite similar to, if we scroll back 10 years, to sort of outsourcing to India.
Yeah.
And obviously that has been successful in some areas and not in others. But I suppose that my question is, you know, what implication does that have for, you know, countries like India that have traditionally benefited because labour costs are a lot cheaper?
Yeah. Microsoft actually reckons that India will be the main hub for cloud computing for its activity for development. They've invested a lot in cloud computing centres out there. I believe SAP has also got a cloud computing development centre out there. I couldn't swear to that, but certainly Microsoft has a huge investment in cloud out there. The overlap between outsourcing and cloud computing is really interesting, because in some respects cloud is almost an alternative. You know, Siemens Siemens, before they embarked on the SuccessFactors HR cloud rollout, looked at doing basic HR outsourcing to see if it was good, and they rejected it as being something that they want to keep in-house but not in-house at the same time, as it were. It's a halfway house between the two. I think, again, in the public sector, that's another thing that makes it very appealing, because it is still politically unacceptable to offshore a lot of IT functions. to India or to anywhere else because it's UK jobs, shouldn't go offshore. All the usual nonsensical arguments that get trotted out about offshoring, but it's just politically unacceptable, no matter if it makes sense. I spoke to somebody at Capita a few weeks ago, and they were talking about some bid that they'd done, and they'd done a series of cost models for this local council client, and offshoring was going to be something like £18 million cheaper. But the politicians just couldn't do it. Even in an age of austerity, they just couldn't do it because it meant sending jobs to India. Cloud computing is a more attractive option for doing it that way. What will be interesting, of course, is that an awful lot of the cloud computing data centres won't actually be based in the UK. At the moment, according to legislation, they all have to be based in the UK. Again, absolutely nonsensical. There's no reason at all why they couldn't be based just in Northern Europe, where all the data protection rules are the same. But for some reason at the moment, the G Cloud requires that there would be a UK data centre, which will become quite interesting because the likes of Salesforce, SuccessFactors and NetSuite and all the big cloud players don't actually have UK data centres at the moment. So they won't actually theoretically be able to bid for any of that business. We're stretching a definition apparently, and Southern Ireland is now regarded as part of the UK for the purposes of Microsoft. So.
I mean, it was interesting. I'm glad you answered that question about outsourcing plays cloud computing because that, for me, was confusing it, and it seemed to be very similar. I mean, we saw. 10 years ago, and I'm old enough to remember it, the peaks and troughs in outsourcing and the rest of the thing. Have we started to see? It's probably too early on, but are we starting to see peaks and troughs in the demand for cloud computing as yet, or are we just still on that growth spurt?
Well, we're still on that way at the moment. We're still on the kind of excuse me, Gartner IDC for us to think of a number, double it type of growth predictions. They all vary. They're all just kind of all going that way. I think what will be interesting is that, and this is not intended in any way to be a prediction, but what will be interesting is the first cloud company that hits the bubble. Salesforce has been an upward growth pattern, so is NetSuite. So of all of the big cloud providers, at some point, someone's going to stumble. Yeah, I'm not saying who it is. I'm not going to predict who it is. I've got my own theories who it will be, but I'm not going to go on record as saying that. But somebody will stumble. Someone will do an Oracle. Yeah, Oracle in the 1990s, late 1980s, early 1990s, fantastic growth cycle. Took one set of results for them nearly to go bankrupt. Yeah, and everything tumbled out the closet, and they had to crash down below and start to build more conservatively. I suspect that will happen in the cloud, or one at least of the cloud pure plays will have a bad accident and have to rebuild. Now, how they deal with that, I think, will indicate the maturity of the market and the maturity of the model as we go forward. If there's a panic about that, then it becomes an issue. I mean, one of the things that is interesting, I said earlier, we talk about cloud pure plays, and I still find myself referring to the likes of NetSuite and Salesforce and right now as startups, and it's just ridiculous. They're 10 years old, but we still think of them as, the new guard, the new kids on the block. The likes of Salesforce, NetSuite, right now, I think, you're talking about safe companies. They're not going to go away. That said, there will be companies, smaller companies, that will go away, that won't work. Just as in every other enterprise software, enterprise IT revolution, companies will go away. Now, you could envisage a time when right now or NetSuite or Salesforce is taken over by Oracle or by SAP or by Microsoft. All of those have been rumoured in the past. It's quite feasible that it could happen. It's a free market out there. But at that point, I think one of the things you do need to think about as an end-user organisation is how you get your data back. EMC just shut down their Atmos storage service direct, and the first time we knew about it was they went on the website and it said, we've decided to stop this now, come and get your data. Yeah, so there's a whole pile of people going, what do you mean come and get my data? What do I do? Where do I take it? So all the kind of stuff you think about in outsourcing, like service level agreements and kind of legal ownership and escrow, think about all of those things when it comes to the cloud as well.
I was going to say, as a closing question, that was the thing. It had all sounded so positive, and I think you hit struck down there.
I'm trying.
Everything's great, but is that one of the major negatives? And one of the things that recruiters should be looking for is looking for people who've got that skill set in knowing the escrow, the SLA, all of the what to do, the almost disaster recovery without having a physical side.
Business continuity, disaster recovery are kind of interesting. There's a huge legal business to be growing out of the cloud. All of those law firms like Bird & Bird, who have very large outsourcing practices, now, curiously enough, have very large cloud computing practices as well. And I think that it's very much buyer beware. any cloud computing provider will tell you that one of the great things is we have to have fantastic customer service, because if we don't, you'll just unplug us and go to the next person. Well, it's not as easy as that, and we all know it's not as easy as that. If Siemens turned around tomorrow and suddenly decided, which they're not, but if they suddenly decided, actually, success factors, we don't like this idea at all, they've still got a problem there, because they put a ton of information into that, they put a ton of investment into it, they're going to have to move it somewhere else. Yeah? Now, as I emphasise, that's not happening. Please, nobody said that I said that was going to happen. But a lot of the traditional issues associated with enterprise systems don't go away. They're still here. They're just a bit easier to deal with.
Excellent. On that, on that bombshell, but I'd like to show our thanks for Stuart and his opportunity to give us in just half an hour a really good overview of the cloud. Thank you, Stuart. Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Really great.
Wow.